There's several different ways, again, to have your hand on the basketball. And I know that a lot of people listening and coaches and whatnot, they'll say, well, I want to know one or the other. And for me, what I've realized is that if I tell coaches or trainers or players one way, then I'm doing a disservice because, again, everybody's built a little bit differently. And so for me, traditionally, when we're talking about that guide hand, we want it to be as straight as possible on the side of the basketball. We don't want that guide hand to affect our shot by any means. But with that being said, there are a lot of great shooters that use their thumb or flick their thumb down or towards the hoop when they shoot the basketball. A lot of that obviously has to do with what they do with their opposite hand. Now, if I can get my elbow in tight and I can get my hand on the basketball and I can follow through off of one of my two first fingers, all right, typically I don't even need this guide hand whatsoever because my flight path to that basketball, the trajectory, the angle, and the flow is going to be super smooth because I have everything in line with the basketball. But again, there are players that have larger hands. Their elbows can't get all the way in because of their shoulders. Their wrists can't turn all the way like they need to, and it feels unorthodox, and they don't do it organically anyways. That forces them to get their hand a little bit different on the basketball. Well, if my hand is here on the basketball, that's a lot different than here. And so if my hand is like this, I have to compensate in some way. Otherwise, my basketball is going to spin all over the place. And so you'll see shooters that when they shoot, they'll shoot like this, and they'll flick the wrist or they'll flick their thumb, and that actually makes their shot get back to where it's spinning perfect, right? And so that flick of the thumb is actually helpful to their jump shot, even though it's not the proper shooting form. Now, if I can get my hand underneath the basketball, I can shoot off of these, and then I use my thumb. Well, that's where you're going to see the side pattern because you organically already naturally can shoot the basketball the right way. So this is not needed. But if I'm here, then it might be needed for a little bit more consistency. So that's where the confusion where people are like, well, why does this person shoot this way and they're such a great shooter and it's not proper shooting form? Well, it's all mechanically, it all works together. Your body naturally wants to sync itself up. So when I walk, if I walk slightly with a limp, my body's going to compensate to try to help me so that I can walk straight. That may mean that I get up on my toes on one foot if my leg is shorter, right? And that just naturally happens. Do we want both our feet to be flat on the ground? Of course, yeah, that's the natural, organic way to do it. But if one of my legs is shorter and I want to have a smooth walk, I got to get on my toes. It's the same thing with shooting the basketball. Your body's built differently, and so you should always try to work the proper way, which is get the basketball on the palm of your hand. Make sure there's a little bit of space in there between. You want to be able to kind of grip the ball. If it's flat, there's going to be an inconsistency. It's going to roll all over the place. You want to have just a little bit of space. Now, there's some shooting coaches that will say, get your hand on the ball on the fingertips and you want to have enough space. That's not realistic. It doesn't really happen that often. You just want enough where you feel like you have control on that basketball. And then again, with the flick of your wrist, the ball is going to roll off one of these three fingers. These two are probably the best here, but if your hand is shifted a little bit more, it might be your middle finger here. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is getting that guide hand on the side of the basketball, not the top, not the bottom, not too far in front, on the side again where it's just a guide. It's not affecting the trajectory of your basketball. And then the last piece I would say is loading your wrist. A lot of players, they shoot let me get into a good spot. They shoot the basketball like this, where their hand and their wrist isn't flicked. It's here. So then they go like this, and they find that they're airballing. There's inconsistency left or right. They're not getting good rotation on the basketball. When you catch the basketball, you should load the wrist every single time. Now, Mike Dunn is a good friend of mine. Rob Fedor, he's done a lot of work with him. A lot of NBA teams now are teaching players to load their wrist, get their elbow back into their shot, and then work into that flow. And it works. Honestly, you're seeing a lot of guys that were not great shooters or not good free throw shooters become better because they're loading that wrist every time. They're getting their hand on the basketball. They're finding that optimal route to the hoop, all right, trying to keep that form that they need, but ultimately understanding if my body's built a little bit different, it may look a little different, and then go from there. So focusing on keeping that hand, that space in there, your follow through, loading up your wrist, making sure that that guide hand isn't affecting it, and then also shifting your body depending on what it looks like. You know, typically Guys that are a little bit more broad-shouldered, they shift a little bit more. Guys that have slimmer, bodies and whatnot, they're going to shoot more straight towards the hoop.